You've been waiting all week for that Saturday show. Tune in, see what happened, let your troubles go. Work real hard, now it's time to take it slow. Kick back and relax with that Saturday show.
Good morning, Albuquerque, and welcome to another episode of That Saturday Show. I'm Jim Harvey, your host, and I'm back again, despite the fact that on Wednesday, I woke up to high winds and snow and rain, and I panicked. I didn't like that. I've been waiting for spring. Spring, where are you? Come on, we got to get this thing going here. Anyway, good news. Deb Haaland, our former congresswoman from Congressional District 2, right here in Albuquerque, has been confirmed as the new Secretary of the Interior in the cabinet of President Joseph Biden. It's historic for a couple of really wonderful reasons. One, Deb Haaland is the first, I said the first Native American to serve in a presidential cabinet. And her positioning with the Department of Interior is going to be so important because we look at the crazy stuff they do to lands in Albuquerque all the time. And so having a champion is going to make a big difference. Congratulations, Madam Secretary. Now, what that means is that there's a vacancy in Congress. So on June 1st of this year, there's going to be a special election to fill Deb Haaland's seat. And here are photographs of the individuals that have declared their candidacy, at least on the Democratic side. We don't have the Republicans up. I don't like to talk about them anyway. But anyway, the Democratic candidates that are running are all posted here for you, and you can get this information by going to the Democratic Party New Mexico website, and they'll tell you all about it. But remember that date, June 1st. You'll have to get out and vote, and let's see who will succeed Madam Secretary Deb Haaland. Asian violence. It's got to stop, y'all. It's got to stop. And we can owe a lot of this rancor to that crazy leader of the criminal enterprise that he tried to call a presidential administration. We cannot, in good conscience, begin to blame our Asian sisters and brothers here in New Mexico or anywhere else in the United States, for that matter, for the coronavirus. We cannot do that. It's not factual. It's not true. It's not right. Stop the violence. We held a vigil last Friday at the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice to declare our stance, to declare our horror, to declare our support for our Asian sisters and brothers, and we invite you to do that at every turn that you can as well. And then, as if that's not enough, Boulder, Colorado, just up the road, some madman walks into a supermarket and kills 10 people. What's happening here? This is still going on. This country is becoming ridiculously violent. I shouldn't say becoming, because it always was violent. It's always been that way. And these guns, we've got to do something about it. These guns, who needs an AR-15 in their home? You can't convince me that that's something that we ought to have. It's got to stop. And I'm just hoping that our legislators on Capitol Hill will finally get the nerve, get the courage to stand up and pass some sensible gun laws to help protect us all around the country. COVID. I got both my shots, y'all. And if you haven't gotten yours yet, keep pushing, but you got to get them. You got to get your COVID shots. You got to protect yourself and to protect others as well. Get your COVID shots. We've got to do it. Laura Dale, we're looking for you. Come on, give us some information that we.
Hello, my name is Laura Dale. I'm speaking on behalf of the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice, who is graciously making a PSA about why you are finding it absolutely impossible to get through the phone lines to the New Mexico Department of Workforce Solutions to find out about your unemployment benefits. And the problem is not just the understaffing, not just that it takes 2 months to train a new person to answer your call. The biggest problem is every single person with a claim is calling in on Monday morning. And when we all call in, that's anywhere from 100,000 to 250,000 calls. And what it does is shut down the system so that they can't help you anymore. So in order to make this work for everybody, please take this seriously and please tell everybody you know. The guide for calling the last number of Social Security numbers and what day that you call is numbers 0, 1, 2, and 3. Only you call on Monday. Numbers 4, 5, and 6. Only you call on Tuesday. Numbers 7, 8, and 9. That is Social Security numbers ending in 7, 8, and 9. Only you call on Wednesday. If you call and there's still a log jam, which again, there is a huge volume of people calling right now, Thursdays and Fridays are the missed days, meaning anybody can call in at any time within their working hours. So let's get this right. Only call based on the last digit of your Social Security number, only call on the appropriate day, and this poor, hardworking, overworked staff will finally be able to do their jobs and help you. Let's all do our part. Let's all make this gracious and dignified for everybody, and let's all get our benefits on time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura Dale, for that information. Quick announcement. This afternoon, beginning at noon, Nanny Chacon, the mural artist for the Breonna Taylor and L'Oreal Singene, will be at the dedication at the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. More on that later. However, it's time for our Pajola Minute, Peace and Justice organizations linking arms, and tonight this morning we're featuring Reverend Andrew Groves of the Bosque Center for Spiritual Living. Welcome, Drew Groves.
Thank you, Jim. It's so great to see you, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm Drew with Bosque Center for Spiritual Living. And the mission and purpose of Bosque CSL is to create activities and spaces that nurture genuine connection and spiritual growth through music, service, and the arts. We are a spiritual community, a church, if you like, but we try not to be too churchy about any of it, because we've all seen some of the trouble that religiosity can get us into, right? How easily beliefs can divide us rather than connect us. And also because when people hear the word church, sometimes they think, what a drag, and we try really hard to not be a drag. So where it's at for me, whatever we're up to, and that might be a theatrical performance or participating in a rally on Civic Plaza or planting trees down by the river or a Sunday worship celebration, it's all about holding a space in which everyone belongs. And then in the space of belonging, we practice being together in ways that feel supportive and powerful, empowering, meaningful, and fun. So it's about anything that connects us more deeply to each other, to our own authentic selves, and ultimately to everything. That's the whole point. Anything that plugs us in and lights us up. So we are a spiritual organization, which means that we do deal with philosophical, theological issues like the meaning of life and who we are in it and how it all goes together. But I am interested in spiritual beliefs and principles and practices, not so much as answers, certainly not hard, fast answers to any of those big questions, but just the big questions themselves and the power of asking them together as starting points for a lifetime of inquiry and discovery. And together we get to try on and explore our own evolving answers to questions like, what beliefs do I hold about myself and other people in the world? And do these beliefs support me feeling connected, or do they exclude, isolate, and separate? And how do we meet a world full of so many challenges with creativity, innovation, power, and hope? And how do we love ourselves and all that we are, completely and honestly, and at the same time be kind to each other, even in disagreement and complexity? And most importantly, what might we create together when we set our hearts and minds to it? And my answer to that last one is anything. We can create anything to which we set our hearts and minds together. There's nothing that we can't achieve. I really believe it, if our understanding and practice of togetherness is big and fierce and loving and open and just. So right now, everything that we're doing is online at bosquecsl.org. And we look forward to meeting again on Sunday mornings in person at Maple Street Dance Space in Nob Hill, 10 a.m. And hopefully that'll be in a few months. That'll make sense. But right now, please check us out at bosquecsl.org. And there are a lot of different ways to get involved and check out what we're up to. Thanks.
Thank you, Reverend Drew. Now, let's get down to business. Evictions have always been a renter's worst case scenario. Well, at least one. And they've become more frequent lately. In fact, the number of individuals that have a risk of losing their homes has increased in Albuquerque significantly since the pandemic started a year ago, which is apparent because of all the conversing and arguing about the eviction moratorium on social media, TV, and all throughout the court system. Men and women and entire families have this fear haunting their beams, their dreams at night, many which consist of more than one child and single mothers that don't have a husband or a partner to help out. Now, on top of everyday responsibilities, COVID, and providing for their kids, a plethora of women will eventually feel the weight of losing their homes upon their shoulders. Their homes, a vital necessity for life in general, not to mention a person's physical and mental well-being, and it will happen due to reasons that were no fault of their own. The number of women and New Mexicans that will suffer or become homeless because of these evictions could be immense in the very near future. Joining us for this conversation is a champion in this area, Rosemary Blanchard. Rosemary, welcome to That Saturday Show.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's good to be here. So, am I just to say what I have to say, or are you going to ask me some questions?
Just fire away, Rosemary. You've been doing this work a lot longer than many of us here, but we know what the problem is.
I look at this work from a couple of points of view. I mean, on the one hand, I come at a lot of this from a law background, that I became an attorney so that I could be a civil rights attorney, and I worked for the Montana Human Rights Commission for a number of years. So I tend to look at these issues as rights-based issues, and certainly globally, the right to housing is recognized. The problem with just going with that approach is that in our society, we are so legalistic and so my rights versus your rights type of a discourse that we forget to ask the more fundamental questions that the rights are built up on, which is to say, what happens to our society in which so many families are desperately insecure in their residence? What happens to children who are going to school not knowing if home is going to be there when they get home, and we're about to have kids back in school again? And as a society, we tend to say, if you can't prove to me you have a right to what you have right now, then it's none of my business what happens to you. That's one of the reasons we've had such a mess with COVID. It's very hard for us, it seems, as a society to think collectively, to say we've got a collective interest in keeping people housed, in keeping people healthy, in keeping contagious diseases from spreading. And so we are reduced to saying, is there a law that can protect these people? And there is right now, there is a moratorium on evictions. And fortunately, the New Mexico Supreme Court has made it a bit longer a moratorium than what the CDC has put forward.
Yeah, just by a few days, though.
So on the one hand, we've got that, but then as we've seen, there's many exceptions that can get made to these legal protections. And there's not much protection for a person who gets pushed into one of these exceptions. For example, if the landlord can say, oh no, it's not because of non-payment of rent, a person can be booted out even in the middle of the pandemic. And so all you have to do is find a good excuse for saying, oh, this is the real reason these folks are going. I feel like our community lacks collective compassion resources. And because of that, each thing is a crisis when it comes along.
We've just got to buckle down, Rosemary. There's so much that we have to do in order to put a dent in a problem that's been with us for such a long time. We will have to continue these conversations, and I just wish that we had more time now. But let's have you back so we can talk more in depth, because this is something we've got to dig deeper, and we've got to come up with solutions. And so joining me today is Tasha, who is working with us on some housing issues as well. How to deal with evictions, how to deal with pending homelessness and things of that sort. And we've been working together to put some services in place. And so just, Tasha, let me just throw it over to you and tell us just where we are.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jim. So the Solidarity Network is a newly formed organization here in Albuquerque. And we are building off of the successful efforts of the original Solidarity Network in Seattle.
Right.
We're a workers and tenants mutual support group that will fight for specific demands using direct collective action. And the demands will come from individuals in the community, also groups in the community. And they will center around things like employee abuse, exploitation in the workplace, landlord abuse, discriminatory fees that are placed on tenants. So issues like that. And these are all very real, very demoralizing injustices that are facing people here in this community. And it's my understanding that when individuals are facing these challenges, it's very frustrating and it's very alienating. People feel alone, like they can't stand up and fight back.
Yeah.
So the Solidarity Network is here to facilitate kind of like strength in numbers. We're here to strategically help people fight against these injustices using direct action. So I just wanted to extend an invitation to the community, people who might be interested in joining our organization, and also people who feel that they could benefit from utilizing our services, or know somebody who could benefit from contacting us. So,
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Again, we're the Albuquerque Solidarity Network, and our number is 505-264-0824.
And now, let's do a legislative update. The legislative session at the Roundhouse ended last Saturday, and we are honored to have with us to do a quick check-in State Senator Antoinette Sedillo-Lopez. Welcome. Welcome, Senator Antoinette Sedillo-Lopez. How did we do?
Well, Jim, I think overall we did pretty well. I think the fact that elections matter really showed, because we got some really important things passed. The paid sick leave was really, really important. And the taking 1.5% for early childhood education and even higher education period was really great. So we got some great things done. I was disappointed that the police accountability bill that I sponsored, which would have brought transparency and accountability and timeliness to the process, got stuck in judiciary. And I'm going to keep pushing it. And one of the things that I said and testified to, and it's really true, is if the George Floyd Act and the Breathe Act both passed in Congress, we're going to have to do it because both of them require independent police investigations and independent prosecutions, which is what my bill would have accomplished. They don't require the other thing that my bill would have accomplished, which is getting a report every 3 months. But, it's going to be important that we're going to have to change the process if those bills pass. And I'm just hoping that we can get it done. As I was telling police officers about this bill, is when the community has lost trust in peace officers, that is just not a safe community.
You're so right. You are so very right. So tell me, in the couple of minutes we have left, what are you forecasting for this special session that's coming up? It's a lot of talk.
Well, I know that the governor is doing this, and I totally understand that she was frustrated because we came so close to having a cannabis bill, so close, and then it didn't happen.
Right.
And it didn't happen because the Republicans did this gimmick, I think. They brought these mail boxes full of empty sheets of paper and with amendments on top of it, made it look like, and I think they would have filibustered the thing and we wouldn't have gotten anything done. And so rather than have that happen, we got a lot of things, important things that needed to be done, including a movement toward affordable health care within the state. So that was really, really good. But we'll have this special session, and my hope is that the governor will put other things that we didn't get done on the special session. Like, as an example, the payday loan bill. Getting those interest rates
that's
down.
really an incredible piece as well. Let's hope that happens.
The Senate, remember the Senate had usually been the conservative place. We got that interest down to 36%. And so I just really would like to see that addressed.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a new day in the Senate in the state of New Mexico, and it's because of people like you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks so much. And, I'm here because of people like you, and I'm here to serve people like you. So always, keep in touch and always keep me accountable if there's ever a need to.
Listen, thank you so much for taking this time out of what I know is a really busy schedule for you. But, I just want to wish you all the best. And we appreciate your being there. We are better off with you in government.
Well, thank you, Jim. And, we're better off with you in the world. So thank you. Thank you so much. And thank the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice for everything you do. It's such important work, So thank you.
We appreciate you. Senator Antoinette Sedillo-Lopez, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We've got a double header on this legislative update. Joining us now is freshman Senator Harold Pope, the only African-American to ever grace the halls of the state Senate. Welcome, Senator Harold Pope.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here, and we're just continuing this conversation on the legislative update, and I know that you had your fingers in some really important pieces of legislation. So could you just share with us, some of the things that happened up there with your legislation, and share anything else some of those inside secrets that we deserve to know?
Well, great. Some of the bills that I was leading on as a sponsor where, of course, the hair discrimination bill, otherwise known as the Crown Act. This is some important legislation that has already been passed in other states, and really dealing with discrimination of African American hair, specifically women, but men. And what we did here in the state is we made this an inclusive bill, making sure that we included the entire BIPOC community, our indigenous communities, and making sure that we protected cultural and religious hairdressing as well. But I was also making sure that some of our earlier Senate bills that we put forward addressing COVID relief for people in our community. So the bill that is providing low interest loans, grants to some of our small businesses. And this week, there's already checks being sent out to where we sent out an additional $600 tax credit to our working families. So those making under $31,000 individually, or I believe it's $39,000 married as a couple, they should be receiving a check for $600. And I know folks need more, but these were a priority going into this session, is how do we take care of folks that have been so harmed by what's been going on with COVID. And we just got to make sure that we're protecting our community, but also what can we do to our small businesses? Because many in our community own these businesses. As far as other legislation, I did some military and veterans bills to look at our military families. One was advanced enrollment that ended up getting passed. We're just waiting on the governor to sign. This allows military families that come over, their kids will be able to register for classes without actually being here. So those orders will be good enough so they don't miss out on opportunities and extracurricular activities here. And then also the Purple Star program, that once they get here, because many of these military kids, they'll move 6 to 9 times within their parents' military career. And we want to make sure that they're able to adjust and they're getting the support that they need when they arrive. So these are some important bills that I was sponsoring and leading on. But of course, I was fully supportive in things that I ran on that needed to happen. And I just thought it was a great session to get the reproductive rights protected in the state by the removal of the abortion ban that was on the books. We got 1.25% is going to be taken out from the permanent land grant fund. That's about at $22 billion. That will go to voters, but that was huge. We did get the bill on end of life, and that's for folks who have been diagnosed with terminal disease and they'd be passing away in 6 months and they're dealing with things. And this gives them the opportunity to go to doctors and seek help if they choose to end their life. And I just think everyone has that right and needs to have that dignity in the state to do that. So these were some of the big bills that, I just supported and got behind. And of course, huge was paid sick leave. This was something huge that faced so many folks in our community during the pandemic, but was already a problem beforehand. And we were able to get that done, as well as the Civil Rights Act, to give folks who are harmed by state actors, now they will have, the ability to seek justice with what happens to them and not worry about qualified immunity stopping that from happening. So fantastic. I could go on and on, but I'll let you jump in because I might have jumped in on some other questions, other areas you wanted to talk about.
It's okay, but we've got a little under a minute left, and I do know that you are leading a legislative session this evening. It's Saturday, a legislative update session this evening. Can you talk a little bit about that and who the participants are?
So we will have a town hall on Saturday at 2 p.m. And what that will involve is it'll be myself, Representative Karen Bash, Representative Damon Eli, and Representative Joy Garrett. And we'll just kind of a roundup to talk about our legislation that we got passed, and what didn't get passed, but then also talk a little bit possibly about this upcoming special session dealing with cannabis legalization.
Fantastic. Senator Harold Pope, thank you for joining us, and we've got to have you back on That Saturday Show. And now it's time for Good News News. Take it.
Welcome to Good News News. I'm your correspondent, Hassani Olugini, and I'm Gugu for Good News. Now, the goal of this segment is to inspire and uplift you, the viewer, with nothing but good news. Let's jump right in. Now, our first story goes a little bit like this. Every day, including holidays, delivery drivers can count on being slammed. With the pandemic causing a huge spike in online ordering, the long day's work never seems to end. A brown uniformed UPS driver in Dauphin, Pennsylvania, has been meeting that challenge every day with good cheer and determination, making sure that the packages in his care are delivered on time and safe. To reward this driver, Chad Turns, for all of his extraordinary work ethic, citizens along his route pitched in to produce a special delivery of their own. One resident, Jenny Shikely, organized a Thank You Chad fundraiser with the goal of $500. Well, you guessed it. They achieved $1,000. Chad was truly overwhelmed by the love and support of the residents on his route. Now, isn't that good news? Thank you, Chad, and all the delivery drivers for bringing our packages to us in a timely fashion. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And helping with the vaccine distribution, too. You all are doing the damn thing. Now, our next story goes a little bit like this. You want to hear it? Here we go. New Mexico has released some new vaccine numbers showing a significant milestone. 35% of the population has at least one shot. Nearly 21% are fully vaccinated. On Monday, it was reported about 29% of nearly 1.7 million New Mexicans who are eligible for the vaccine had received their first dose. The state said it believes that the vaccines are responsible for about 60% reduction in new COVID cases each day. Now, extra, got a little more to go with this story. President Biden, sure feels good to say president and really mean it now that we actually have a president. Don't get me started. President Biden says that he is proud to announce that in his first 58 days, he has reached his goal of vaccinating the country. The U.S. is on pace to have enough of the 3 current authorized vaccines to cover the entire adult population in just 10 weeks from now. Now, isn't that good news? All right, everyone, do your part and get vaccinated. Help save a life. It's up to you. Now, our last story is in recognition of Women's Month, and it goes like this. For a little girl growing up in Colombia in the 1980s, a science career with NASA may have seemed about as likely as setting a foot on a faraway planet. These days, however, Diana Trejo is an aerospace engineer. She leads a team of 45 people at NASA's laboratories that's responsible for the robotic arm in last month's Mars rover landing. With just $300 to her name, Diana took a series of housekeeping jobs to put herself through Miami-Dade College. In addition to learning English, she studied aerospace engineering. Sometimes she had to take 6 buses to get to class. She became the first Hispanic woman to be admitted to NASA's academy. She did so well that she and one other student received a job offer from the prestigious institution. This past February, when the Perseverance rover landed on the surface of Mars, it was accompanied by commentary from Diana in what became NASA's first ever Spanish language transmission. Diana said, "If it takes a rocket to shatter the glass ceiling, so be it." Diana's story really is proof that just Beyond the barrier lies an entire universe of opportunity waiting for anyone willing to work hard enough to reach for the stars. Now, isn't that good news? All right, Diana, thank you for all your contributions to our great country's history. And young people, keep striving. Little girls, you can do this too. Hell, you can even become Vice President of the United States of America. That's really good news. Now, before I go, I remember I told you that I would tell you a little bit about me every now and then so you get a good grasp on who your correspondent is. Well, I want to tell you about when I was in the 5th grade, one of my teachers says, you are not going to amount to anything in life because you procrastinate so much. I looked her up and down and I said, well, you just wait and see. Now, the best way to turn a frown upside down is to get Gugu for good news. I'm your correspondent, Hassani Olujimi, and I'll be right here next time with more good news.
So we're back. Welcome back to That Saturday Show. We have an exciting interview coming up next, and it is with our own Rivera Sun, activist, author, publisher, trainer, and so much more. And we are fortunate to have her in the community doing the great work she does. Welcome, Rivera.
Thanks so much, Jim, and thanks to the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. Glad to be on the show today.
Glad to have you here, too. So let's just jump right in the short time that we've got. And I want to talk about your new book, Winds of Change. And I know that it is in some way inspired and influenced by a previous publication of yours, The Dandelion Insurrection, which a lot of people are still talking about around town. And so just, share with us what's happening there.
Well, I hope they're saying good things about Dandelion Insurrection. It's been out for about 8 years now, and it feels, sometimes I scratch my head and say, how did I write this 8 years ago when it's so apropos to some of the things we've living through now? Positing a hidden corporate dictatorship and nonviolent movements, which we're seeing surges in. But over the years, I wrote a sequel, and then we just released Winds of Change, which is the 3rd part of the trilogy. Yes. And that's looking at deep systemic change. So whereas Dandelion Insurrection was more oppositional, saying no to the problems, Winds of Change is saying, what do we say yes to instead? And in this case, what does it look like when we have people-powered democracy? Not just wealthy individuals or pawns of wealthy individuals calling all the shots in our political system, but what would it look like if ordinary people were deeply listened to and involved in the political process in a way that actually had power and teeth and impact, versus just having to beg politicians to do the right thing?
What a concept.
Right?
I just love it. Something tells me that's going to be one of those handbooks for activism too, because there's so much conversation right now about systemic change. And so I think that Winds of Change is very timely, and I'm just grateful for it. So tell me, is there a way that you go about, that you approach your writing, and is there a time in the day or the week or month, that tends to work best for you? How do you write? When do you write?
I get up in the morning and I write first thing in the morning, before I open my computer, before I tune into the news, before I deal with all of the things I deal with as an activist. Because you've got to carve out that creative space before the world starts to bombard you, right? And to listen a little bit to the story that needs to be told, which is often not the story that we are under assault with, or we have to listen to in the news. There's kind of a deeper, longer story that humanity is wanting to tell, something that's more about the vision that has been consistently held by people for racial justice, for gender justice, for having all sexualities allowed in our social sphere, for having economic justice, for having political justice, for having respect for the earth. ordinary human beings have not given up on these visions, even against incredible odds. And so I try to listen to what is the next piece of the story that would be really great if we could hear it a little more deeply in our time. Because novels, they're 80,000 words and they're a world inside these two covers. And so what can we do with that time that we spend together? What is the way to nurture the spirits of those who are working for change already, which is a big question for my work, because I do try to write for people who are committed to justice and thinking about what can and should change in our world.
Wonderful, wonderful. So now, in addition to these wonderful novels that you've blessed us with out here, I know that you also edit a weekly newsletter called Nonviolence News. Can you talk a little bit about that compilation of stories of nonviolence in action?
Yeah, so Nonviolence News collects 30 to 50 stories of nonviolence in action each week from around the world. So I have a good handful of stories from the US, but I also really try to listen and pick up stories that are happening all over the place. Things like how the Haitian judges shut down the justice system because of their totally corrupt not president who's pretending to be president still.
Right.
Or how Myanmar women hung their clothes across the road to tap into a cultural taboo that men wouldn't walk under women's clothes, to stop and stall the police and the agents of the military coup that were trying to stop down their widespread resistance that's going on right now. So, this past week was International Women's Day, and here in the US we had a lot of women are great, here's some flowers, hand clapping. But around the world, particularly in Latin and South America, women were, I wouldn't say up in arms, because we're actually talking about nonviolent struggle in this case, but they were in the streets, they were feisty, they were disruptive. 8 million women demonstrated throughout numerous Latin American countries. And they are really mad, and rightly so, about femicide, about gender, the economic impacts that are disproportionate on gender, lack of access to reproductive rights, and actually a quite long list of things. So it was very exciting for me as a woman in the US to see what our fellow women around the world are really standing up for.
It's really been an impactful month. Right here in Albuquerque alone, I mean, there've been, quite a few things going on to commemorate International Women's Day and also Women's History Month. And, and here at That Saturday Show, we've purposely and intentionally turned our attention to making certain that there was a particularly strong focus, on achievements of women. And women's voices don't get heard like they need to. Women's achievements don't get acknowledged like they need to. So this is especially wonderful, and I'm glad that in this COVID-19 environment we've been able to do as much as we have been doing in that respect. So brava.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things that's coming out of the research into the field of conflict studies is the critical role that women play in particularly peace building work and upholding peace agreements. But I just read this amazing story from Yemen where there had been a 30-year-long water dispute, right? In the midst of numerous wars and violent conflicts, actually in that time span. The men in the area had not been able to resolve water access for these two feuding groups. And finally, the women stepped up and got involved, which is actually extremely unusual for the particular kind of social pressures that was going on in the area. But the women were recognizing that they didn't have water to cook with, children didn't have water, and something needed to change. Right. So they stepped up and they resolved that water dispute for the first time in 30 years. Incredible.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So looking at the newsletter, is there any recent story, even some story in the past, that particularly stands out for you?
Yeah, well, I think we talked a little bit about what's going on in Myanmar, but it's really quite profound, the level of participation in the anti-coup resistance that's going on, and then also the variety of tactics that they are using and how skillful they're being about changing tactics,
Yeah.
particularly because the regime is increasingly becoming violent and repressive. They killed something like 50 protesters just a couple days ago. And that's on top of others that they have been killing. So the resistance is really shifting gears into what we call more dispersed tactics. And I think this is something we could all learn from, because throughout the pandemic here in the U.S., as we saw so many racial justice struggles rising up, we saw climate actions, anti-pipeline resistance. One of the things that we really had to grapple with was what I like to call the three major threats in the U.S. And one, of course, we have to acknowledge is police repression. Right? That we have a very repressive police force, particularly and increasingly against not just people of color, but anyone standing up with protest and demonstration. But we also have alt-right violence or counter-protester violence that is serious and dangerous. And then, of course, we have a pandemic on top of that. So out of the 300 plus methods of nonviolent action that are at our disposal, how do we know which ones to use when we need to emphasize keeping people safe and continuing to push for substantive and disruptive movements for change, right? So we can't just petition, we can't just beg, we can't just have virtual rallies. We need to find ways to withdraw resources from the problems that we face, or intervene in the flowing of an injustice so we get in the way of it. And sometimes that doesn't mean literally. Sometimes we've got to look at the finances. Sometimes we've got to look at the way their office system works. Pipeline protesters had been booking appointments on the open calendars of finance CEOs who were backing fossil fuel pipelines, right? Disrupting their entire schedule. Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah. I was so happy to see, for example, that the Biden administration immediately took a stand at Standing Rock and did something about that Keystone pipeline, shut it down, and more of that needs to happen. But it's up to us to bring it to the attention of the powers that be in order to make those things happen. And who knows how long we've got in order to do it, but we just have to get out there and do it, So that brings me to the question, and in the midst of COVID-19, what do you feel about the safety and, of street protests and the other kinds of activities that, we really need to keep engaging in? You think we're safe?
Yeah, I think, interesting things happened in COVID. There was a lot of predictions when the pandemic first started rolling out that movements would just get squelched. They would just disappear. But actually what we saw is that by and large, most movements and campaigns shifted tactics. They shifted approaches.
Right.
Some shifted more into constructive work. So they focused on building relationships. They focused on grounding and anchoring and training up their organizers better, which I thought was very skillful use of time in many cases. And then some shifted into those dispersed tactics that we're talking about, things like boycotts and strikes, right? Where you don't have to be in the street to actually impact the issue. And so, learning how to shift gears from that. We had a bit of a bad habit in the U.S. of using the street protests as our go-to or only type of action. And what we found, unfortunately, far too often is that those kind of protests are actually quite easy for power holders to ignore.
That's
right? And so we really need to make sure that even though we could use street demonstrations or visibility actions, we need to make sure we're pairing those with acts of non-cooperation and nonviolent intervention.
So we've got about a minute left, and I'm going to see if I can pack in a couple of things in this short period of time, because I know that you train people in strategies for nonviolent change. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about, how you approach that, but also want to put in a plug, because this is one that I probably want to invite you back for, and that is one of our Mother's Day programs. We are going to put together, hopefully, a panel to talk about the real origins and meaning of Mother's Day. And I think that so many of us take that for granted. So it's not about just flowers and Sunday hats and candy and dinners. There's a much more impactful, meaning in the history of Mother's Day. And so we're looking at having a panel, and I want to invite you back for that. But talk about your nonviolent training.
Well, that would be great to join that panel. I'm passionate about reclaiming the anti-war origins of Mother's Day, and particularly as the U.S. military is looking to draft women, something that's not on a lot of people's radar but should be talked about more. We have an opportunity to abolish that draft altogether for all genders, which is the only path for justice forward, basically.
That's right.
But when we look at strategy trainings for nonviolent change, one of the things I see all the time is that nonviolence actually gets a bad rap, often because power holders are using it to try to control protesters. Oh, you should be peaceful, you should be nonviolent, which is very annoying to people like me who come from the radical tradition of nonviolent struggle, the disruptive tradition, the tradition that gives us some of the major arcs of justice movements in human history. Right, so I try to tap into what makes nonviolent struggle work, and why does it not work when it seems to be failing. Right, oftentimes we're using too many acts of protest and not enough acts of non-cooperation. And so when we look at strategy, we look at what is required to win this struggle, not just what is our favorite tactic, but what would really change the power dynamic in this equation, to the point where we see major power holders conceding to popular demands, and to the point where we see actually changes being made that are in alignment with deep and profound justice, not just hat tips or platitudes.
I appreciate your work in that area. So we've been talking today with Rivera Sun, activist, author, publisher, and trainer. And I just thank you again for joining us on That Saturday Show. And even though this conversation has been much too short, we're going to have to invite you back so that we can get down into the weeds and really have some really in-depth discussions about some things. Thanks again for joining us today, and look forward to you coming back and joining us again.
Thanks so much.
Her latest book is Winds of Change. If you haven't gotten it, go get it. It's going to be a real manual, a real handbook for things in the future. And that concludes this interview for That Saturday Show. And now back to the studio. 2 quick announcements. June 1st, Congressional District 1 election for Congress. Vote. Tonight, 7 p.m., 400 Lomas Northwest, Answer Coalition of Vigil Against Violence Against Our Asian Sisters and Brothers. Be there. We take you out now with music from Wagogo, and thank you for joining us on That Saturday Show.
Mukurwa, Panachandi no Tora, Mukutuka.
Until the next time, it's time to say goodbye. When you out here in the streets, keep it real, 505. We love everybody, we just want to let you know. Thanks for tuning in to that Saturday show.